She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, but that wasn't the worst of it. Her shoes were 2 sizes too small, borrowed from a neighbor, and her name tag was bent at the corner from weeks of double shifts. Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes anymore, and every time she blinked, the world swayed just a little more. Still, she kept pouring coffee, clearing tables, and apologizing to angry customers like it was all normal. But when she turned too fast with a tray in her hands, her body finally gave out. She collapsed, hard, like a string had been cut. Gasps rang out. Some customers jumped to their feet, others just stared, frozen mid-sip. Her purse had flown open. On the floor, contents spilling across the greasy tiles like her life laid bare. A few coins, a broken lipstick, a photo creased from folding, and something that made one man stop cold. Daniel, the millionaire investor seated near the window, rushed forward instinctively, loosening his tie as he knelt beside her. He had no idea why his heart was racing, only that something about her collapse hit a nerve he didn't know was still raw. Paramedics had been called. The manager stood back helplessly, muttering something about another sick day, but Daniel didn't hear it. His eyes had landed on the photograph lying beside Lena's faded wallet. It was a child's drawing, torn on one side, the colors still bright. It showed a little girl holding the hand of a woman in an apron standing in front of a house with boarded windows. Underneath, in shaky crayon, were 6 words: "I love you. Please come home." Daniel picked it up slowly, and in that moment, something inside him broke wide open. Lena hadn't slept in 2 days. Her fingers trembled as she carried a tray of coffees, but she masked the exhaustion behind a smile she'd practiced in the mirror every morning. The din of the cafe blurred into a dull hum, her heartbeat pounding louder in her ears than the noise around her. Sweat clung to her neck despite the cold air, and then, without warning, her legs buckled. The tray crashed, cups exploded. Her body hit the floor with a sickening thud that silenced the room in an instant. Everyone turned. A few gasped. One woman screamed, and someone pulled out a phone, not to help, but to record. But in the far corner, a man in a black tailored coat stood up so fast his chair toppled over. Daniel Hart, a self-made millionaire known more for headlines than heroics, rushed forward with something strange burning in his chest. As he dropped to his knees beside her, her purse tumbled from her shoulder, scattering its contents across the floor. A single paper drifted like a feather and landed face up at his feet. At first, Daniel didn't notice. He was trying to wake her, his voice low but urgent. But then he saw it, and everything around him stopped. Not the coins or the receipts, but the paper. A child's drawing, yes, but more than that. A red X drawn over a house. A stick-figure girl with tears falling from her eyes. A woman, clearly the mother, lying in what looked like a hospital bed, tubes drawn in with careful colored strokes. Underneath, written in shaky letters, "Please don't go to heaven yet, Mommy." Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. Somewhere deep in his memory, he had seen a drawing just like that. Years ago. Different child, different house, same pain, the same desperate fear. And for the first time in a decade, Daniel Hart felt the sharp edge of helplessness, not his own, but hers. The kind that money can't silence, the kind that leaves scars beneath a suit no one can see. She had served table 6 3 times, and they still hadn't left a tip. One of them laughed when she spilled a drop of coffee, and she apologized like it was her fault the world was heavy. Lena's hair was pinned back with a pencil, her apron stained from yesterday's shift, and her eyes held a kind of tiredness that no sleep could fix. No one knew she'd walked 5 miles to work that morning because her bus fare had gone to her daughter's school lunch. No one asked why she limped slightly with each step, or why her knuckles were red from washing dishes without gloves. They just expected her to smile. When her body hit the floor, it wasn't just a collapse, it was a surrender. The kind that happens when strength runs out and no one notices. The cafe paused. Some stared, some whispered, but no one moved, except for Daniel Hart. He wasn't known for kindness. He built empires with numbers, not with people. But something in him stirred as he watched her fall, and he found himself kneeling beside her before he knew why. Her purse had fallen open. He reached to gather it, more out of instinct than intention, and then he saw the drawing. It was drawn on the back of a grocery receipt, the ink from the store logo bleeding faintly through. But the image was unmistakable, a child's crayon world full of hope and heartbreak. A little girl with pigtails, holding a flower, a woman beside her with tired eyes and a heart on her chest. Above them, a shaky message. "I'll be good forever. Just please don't leave." Daniel's hand trembled. This wasn't just a drawing. It was a promise, a plea. A child bargaining with the universe in the only language she knew, love. He blinked hard, heart racing, the paper crinkling slightly in his grip. This was innocence, unfiltered and raw. This was the kind of pain that didn't shout. It whispered quietly from the corners of lives too often ignored. In that moment, the millionaire didn't see a waitress on the floor. He saw a mother holding the world together with threadbare hope, and he saw a little girl waiting at home, with no idea her mother was fighting battles alone, on empty. Daniel had spent years chasing silence, the kind that money brings. Silence from overdue bills, from past mistakes, from the memory of his father's anger and his mother's quiet suffering. Success gave him luxury, power, and distance. Distance from pain, from people, from the version of himself that once knew hunger. But kneeling beside Lena, watching her lie unconscious on the cold floor with a child's drawing clutched in his trembling hands, the silence inside him shattered. Because for the first time in years, he didn't see a stranger. He saw a reflection. He had built a life where emotion was weakness and charity was a tax write-off. Every meeting was timed, every handshake measured, every decision made with profit in mind. But there was no profit in this moment, no reason to stay, yet he couldn't move. Something about that drawing, the tiny stick figure pleading for her, mother's life. Stripped away the armor he wore every day, he saw the innocence of a child believing her love could keep someone alive. He remembered being that child, and he remembered how it felt when no one came to help. As the paramedics arrived and took Lena's pulse, Daniel's thoughts spun in silence. He looked around at the other customers, still frozen, still watching, still distant. No one knew her name. No one cared why she fell. They just wanted their orders filled. And for the first time, Daniel felt ashamed, not just of them, but of himself. Of every ignored plea, every moment he'd turned away from someone struggling because it wasn't his problem. But now this was personal. It wasn't just about Lena anymore. It was about what kind of man he had become. That night, Daniel sat in his car outside the hospital for over an hour before going in. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't even know if she was awake. But he knew one thing. He was done being silent, done being distant. Because if a child could believe that love could save a life, then maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to believe in something bigger than success. And maybe helping someone wasn't about charity. Maybe it was redemption. Maybe this was the moment that would finally bring him back to life. The hospital room was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after storms. Not peaceful, but heavy. Lena lay still, her breathing shallow, a soft monitor beep counting the seconds like a ticking clock. Her uniform had been folded on the chair beside her bed, stained, worn, and wrinkled from too many shifts with too little rest. Daniel stood at the door for what felt like hours, the drawing still in his coat pocket, edges now warm from his hands. He wasn't supposed to be here. He didn't even know why he came. But something deeper than logic had pulled him in, a thread of humanity he hadn't touched in years. He stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid the moment might break if he moved too fast. Her face looked different without the forced smile, younger, more fragile. He noticed the calluses on her hands, the slight bruising under her eyes, the quiet strength she carried even in stillness. And then he saw something that undid him completely. Taped to the inside of her purse, now resting on the bedside table, was a folded photo of a little girl. She had crooked teeth, messy hair, and eyes full of light. On the back, written in a child's handwriting, "My mommy is the strongest person in the world." Daniel sat down. He didn't plan to. His knees gave out without permission, and he found himself clutching the drawing like it was the last piece of something sacred. Emotion hit him in waves, slow, relentless, and full of weight. He thought of his mother, working late in diners, just like this one, feeding him before feeding herself, hiding her pain behind the same tired eyes. He thought of how she used to whisper, "One day, life will be kinder," even when it wasn't. And here was Lena, a stranger, carrying the same burden, speaking the same silent prayers. A tear slid down his cheek, not because she was broken, but because she had kept going. Because in a world that kept taking, she still gave. To her child, to strangers, to thankless jobs. And Daniel, a man surrounded by power, realized for the first time that this quiet resilience, this unseen bravery, was what real strength looked like. Not the cars or suits or shares, but the ability to keep standing when everything wants you to fall. And as he reached out and gently placed the drawing on the nightstand beside her, he whispered a promise, not just to help her, but to never ignore pain like hers again. Daniel hadn't cried in 17 years. Not when he closed his mother's casket. Not when his marriage ended in silence. Not when he made his first million and realized it didn't fill the emptiness he'd carried since childhood. But sitting there in that cold, quiet hospital room, watching a woman he barely knew fight to keep breathing, something inside him cracked wide open. It wasn't just the sight of her, it was everything she represented. A mirror, a memory, a truth he had long buried beneath titles, transactions, and towering walls of pride. His hand hovered over the edge of the nightstand where her things lay scattered in quiet disarray. He picked up the drawing again, tracing the crayon lines with his thumb like they were sacred. The little girl had drawn the sun with a heart in it. It was a detail only a child would think to add, hope living in the sky. Daniel couldn't look away. He imagined that girl waiting by a window that evening, her dinner gone cold, eyes fixed on the street, waiting for footsteps that might never come. And the guilt twisted in him, not because it was his fault, but because he had once been, that child. And now, as a man, he had ignored thousands like her. He reached into Lena's purse again, not to invade, but to understand. He found a receipt folded around a sticky note. On it, a grocery list. Bread, milk, antibiotics, circled twice. Beside it, in handwriting shaky with exhaustion, the words, "Check if there's enough left." Beneath that, a line scratched, out so hard it had torn the paper. Diapers. Daniel blinked hard. This wasn't just financial struggle, it was quiet desperation. She was choosing between medicine and necessities, gambling her own health so her child wouldn't suffer. How many days had she come to work sick? How many smiles had she forced through pain? The weight of it pressed down on him like stone. And then, soft movement. Lena stirred. Her eyes fluttered, slow, confused. When they opened, they didn't focus on him at first. But when they did, she tried to sit up embarrassed, apologizing, like she had made a scene. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I couldn't miss work," she whispered. And that broke him. She was barely conscious, and still, she was worried about her shift, about the customers, about being a burden. "No," Daniel said quietly, firmly, his voice thick. "You don't have to apologize for being human." Their eyes met. In hers, there was confusion, shame, fatigue, but underneath, the faintest flicker of resistance. The kind of fire only people who've had to fight for every breath carry. Daniel leaned forward, gently placing the drawing beside her hand. "Your daughter thinks you're the strongest person in the world," he said. "And now so do I." She looked at the paper, then back at him, eyes welling. Not with tears of sadness, but with the ache of being seen, really, finally seen. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not pity, not charity, something purer, human, healing, whole. Just as Lena blinked back tears, trying to steady her breath and understand why a stranger had come to sit at her bedside with such compassion. Daniel felt the buzz of his phone in his pocket. He ignored it at first. Nothing could be more important than this moment. But the vibration came again, persistent. Reluctantly, he pulled it out, expecting some irrelevant business update. Instead, his screen lit up with a single word that chilled him to his core. Urgent. It was a message from his personal assistant. "You need to see this. Now. It's about the woman you're with." Daniel excused himself gently and stepped outside into the hallway. His hands were cold, his heart heavy with the kind of fear that doesn't make sense until it does. He opened the message and froze. Attached was an article link and beneath it a scanned document. He tapped. The article was dated 2 years ago. A story buried deep in a local paper. Single mother accused of embezzlement from local charity. Case dropped due to lack of evidence. The name hit him like ice. Lena Marlowe. The scanned file confirmed it. Her name, photo, and a brief summary of an investigation. Funds from a small food pantry had gone missing, and she had been the last one on record with access. Daniel's chest tightened. A wave of doubt crashed over the warmth he had just felt. Had he misjudged her? Was the kindness just a mask? He stared at the hallway floor, heart pounding, the drawing still folded in his coat pocket. But something didn't sit right. The article didn't scream guilt, it whispered questions. No conviction, no follow-up, just suspicion and silence. He stepped back into the room, slower this time, watching her. She was stroking the edge of the hospital blanket absent-mindedly, staring at the ceiling with that same look of quiet endurance. And then, out of nowhere, she spoke. Soft, like a confession she'd been waiting to make. "I used to work at a food bank," she said, not even knowing what Daniel had just learned. "They thought I stole money, but I didn't. I just took a few expired items home. My daughter hadn't eaten in 2 days." Daniel swallowed hard, shame rising in his throat. She hadn't lied. She hadn't hidden. She had just survived, and the system that should have helped her had turned her into a suspect. He sat down beside her again, slower this time, more certain. "You don't need to explain," he said. "I believe you." And that was the unexpected twist. Not in her story, but in his. Because Daniel Hart, the man who once saw the world in black and white, now saw the truth buried in the gray. That sometimes broken systems label heroes as criminals. That quiet sacrifice often wears the mask of guilt. And that the people who have the least often give the most. Title: Waitress collapses at work. What the millionaire sees in her purse brings him to tears. The room had fallen into a soft stillness again, broken only by the beep of the heart monitor and the occasional shuffle of nurses' shoes down the hallway. Lena stared out the window now, not really seeing anything, her body too tired to move, her spirit too worn to speak. But Daniel didn't rush her. He sat quietly beside her, holding that fragile drawing like a treasure, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken things in the air between them. And in that silence, he began to understand something deeper, something invisible, yet unmistakable. The language of silent sacrifice. She hadn't told anyone about her condition. The nurses said she was severely dehydrated, dangerously undernourished. She hadn't eaten a full meal in days, not because she was dieting, but because she'd used her last few dollars to refill her daughter's asthma inhaler. There was no social media plea, no GoFundMe, no crying to customers for sympathy. Lena didn't beg. She didn't announce her pain. She just carried it quietly, trading her comfort for her child's needs one exhausted shift at a time. Daniel glanced down at her hands. Rough, cracked, trembling faintly from weakness. They were the hands of someone who had washed dishes in cold water, folded laundry in dark hallways, carried groceries on foot, and still reached out with gentleness at the end of the day. They weren't weak. They were worn by love, the kind of love that expects nothing in return. The kind of love the world rarely applauds because it's lived in the shadows, in silence. And then, on the corner of the nightstand, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A wrinkled envelope with "Rent Final" stamped in red. Daniel picked it up gently. The date showed it was due last week. She had worked through collapsing exhaustion, not just out of duty, but out of quiet panic. Because if she lost that apartment, she wouldn't just lose a roof. She'd lose the only stable ground her daughter had ever known. He looked at her again, his throat tight. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't asked for help. And not out of pride, but out of fear that if she stopped to ask, everything would fall apart. Lena was the kind of person who kept standing long after she should have fallen. She collapsed not because she was weak, but because she had carried too much, for too long, all by herself. The next morning, the hospital light cast a pale golden hue over Lena's bed, but she was already awake, sitting up slowly, trying to gather her strength, her fingers trembling as she reached for her shoes on the floor. She winced slightly, still weak, but her eyes had a quiet fire. She was ready to return to work, not because she was better, but because the world didn't pause for single mothers and bills didn't wait for recovery. She had no choice. She always pushed forward. That's what she did. That's what mothers do. Daniel had returned, this time standing near the doorway. He watched her struggle to get dressed with one IV still dangling from her arm. Something surged in him, an unfamiliar force. It wasn't pity. It was fury. Fury at a world that let people like her suffer in silence. Fury at himself for only now seeing what so many look past every day. And beneath that anger, a fire to protect, to fight for someone who'd never had anyone fight for her. He stepped forward, voice firm but steady. "You're not going anywhere, Lena." She looked up, startled, then shook her head with quiet determination. "I can't afford to miss another shift. I've already lost too much time." "I know," he said, kneeling down in front of her, lowering his voice. "But you won't lose anything else. Not while I'm here." Her eyes widened, unsure if she was hearing him right. He continued, pulling a folded paper from his coat, a bank form. "Your rent is covered. Your medical bills too. And there's enough in this account to give you breathing room. Real breathing room. You don't owe me anything. This isn't charity. This is justice." Lena shook her head slowly, overwhelmed, tears brimming again. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because I see you now, and I won't let the world grind you down just because it's forgotten how to value quiet strength." There was a shift in his voice, a steadiness, like a man who had built empires but had finally found something worth protecting. Not just a woman, but everything she represented. Unseen resilience, unfailing love, and unspoken sacrifice. From that moment on, Daniel wasn't just a millionaire. He became a shield. He arranged for childcare, set up a flexible job on her terms, quietly ensured no more final notices ever darkened her doorstep again. Not because she asked, but because she never should have had to. And as Lena held her daughter that night safe, warm, and fed, she whispered a promise to herself, "I won't ever give up." But now, she didn't have to fight alone. Long after Lena had fallen into a much-needed sleep, Daniel sat in his car just outside the hospital. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of street lamps and the quiet hush of passing cars. But inside his chest, the noise was deafening. His mind replayed every second. Her collapse, the drawing, the rent notice, the truth she never spoke aloud. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Hart felt something he wasn't used to feeling: regret. Not just for the moment he had nearly walked away from her story, but for every moment in his past where he did walk away. All the times he ignored struggling single parents in the cafes he built. All the times he watched exhausted employees clock in with sunken cheeks and didn't ask why. All the boardroom meetings where he pushed for efficiency without once considering the weight it put on the people at the bottom. He hadn't just been distant. He had been blind. Willingly blind. He closed his eyes and saw his mother again. How she used to come home with burns on her hands from dishwashing, but always greeted him with a smile. How she once walked 5 miles in the rain to deliver forgotten homework to school because you deserve to be seen like the others. Daniel had spent years trying to escape that life. Now, he realized, he had also abandoned the people still living it. And Lena. Lena was the mirror that cracked open that illusion. The next morning, Daniel returned not with flowers or speeches, but with purpose. He sat beside her, humbler now. "I used to think success meant rising above struggle," he said softly. "But I see now, real success means reaching back and lifting others up with you." Lena listened quietly, unsure of what to say. He continued, eyes steady. "I want to change how I run my businesses. Fair hours, on-site childcare, health support, real things, things that matter." He paused, then added, "I never asked how anyone was surviving before, but I will now, because of you." Tears filled her eyes again, not just from his words, but from the weight of being heard. And Daniel, a man who once measured life in profit margins, finally saw something richer. Redemption, not just through generosity, but through transformation. His regret had become his reason. And his redemption wasn't found in saving someone, it was in finally seeing them. The hospital room was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The lights were dimmed, casting soft shadows on the walls as Lena lay sleeping, her face pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Daniel stood at the window, staring out at the city below, its lights twinkling like stars, cold and indifferent. He clenched the small crayon drawing in his hand, now worn at the folds. His jaw tightened. Something was missing. Something didn't make sense. He turned back to the nightstand and scanned her belongings again. The purse, the folded receipts. Then he noticed it. A second envelope tucked under her wallet. It hadn't been opened. Carefully, he pulled it out. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a handwritten line across the front. In case I don't come home. His breath caught. Hands trembling slightly, he opened it and found a note written on the back of a used napkin. The words were shaky, rushed, smudged by what looked like water. Maybe tears. It read, "To my little girl. I'm sorry if Mama's not there one day. I tried. I tried so hard. Always remember, you are brave and you are kind. Don't let the world harden you like it tried to harden me. I love you more than the moon, more than the sky. Please forgive me for being tired." Daniel's heart pounded. This wasn't just a mother overworked. This was a woman who had been on the edge, so close to giving in, not out of weakness, but because the world had given her no room to breathe, no space to rest. He swallowed hard, his chest aching. He could hear her daughter's laugh in his mind, the drawing, the heart inside the sun. That child had no idea how close she came to losing everything. Then, suddenly, the door creaked. Lena stirred, her eyes fluttering open slowly. She caught sight of the note in his hands and froze. Her face turned pale again, this time from embarrassment. "Shame. I didn't mean for anyone to see that," she whispered, her voice barely there. I needed to get it out, in case." Daniel walked to her slowly, knelt by her bedside, and for the first time, he didn't see a waitress. He saw a warrior, a survivor, someone who had fought battles no one applauded, who had loved so fiercely she was willing to disappear if it meant her daughter would have one more chance. And then came the moment. He gently placed the note back. In her purse, stood tall and looked her in the eyes. "You don't ever have to write a letter like that again," he said, voice thick but clear. "Not while I'm here. Not while I can do something about it." Tears welled in her eyes, but he wasn't done. "I'm starting a foundation, in your name. For single parents. For people who are hanging on by a thread. People who need one break, just one, to make it through. Your story won't be forgotten. It'll be the reason others don't give up." That was the moment everything shifted, from silent despair to powerful purpose, from isolation to being the spark that could change lives. The days that followed moved slowly, but something had changed. Not just in Lena's life, but in Daniel's world too. For the eye, first time in years he wasn't checking stock prices or scanning business forecasts. Instead, he spent his mornings with a quiet purpose, writing plans, meeting with advisors, and crafting something that went far beyond another company. He was building a lifeline. Meanwhile, Lena was healing, not just physically, but emotionally. For years, she had walked through life as if she were invisible, holding her breath in rooms that never welcomed her presence. But now, there was air. There was space. There was light. Her daughter laughed more, slept better. And one morning, she brought home a new drawing. This time, not of a sun or a heart, but of 3 hands holding each other. Above them, in shaky, block letters, it read, "Stronger together." Daniel had never cried over a child's artwork before, but that morning he did. And then came the final moment of transformation. Under a blue sky on a spring morning, Daniel stood in front of a crowd, reporters, families, social workers, and Lena, standing quietly in the back, holding her daughter's hand. Behind him, a new building was being unveiled, modest but warm, with wide doors and a small playground out front. "This is the Marlowe Center," Daniel said into the microphone, his voice strong. "A place where single parents can find childcare, job training, and above all, support without judgment. I built companies that helped millions consume. Now I want to help people live. And it started with one woman, one letter, one crayon drawing." The crowd applauded, but Lena didn't move. She stood still, tears silently tracing her cheeks, her daughter beaming beside her, because in that moment she wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a burden or a case file. She was the reason something beautiful had begun. The story didn't end with a miracle check or a rich man playing savior. It ended with clarity, that unseen heroes live among us, waiting not for rescue, but for recognition. And it ended with hope, that one act of kindness, one look into someone's truth, can create ripples that change not just one life, but many. And as Daniel stepped down from the podium, he walked directly to Lena and knelt to her daughter's eye level. "You helped save your mom," he said softly, "and now she's helping save the world." The little girl nodded, smiling. "I know," she whispered, "because in the end, hope doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be seen."